Jean has been with us on this programme since the start. It's a pleasure to work with you, Jean. You challenge us, you ask us hard questions about how we do things, and that's good. I welcome that. You make us think, and you help us to understand how research and practice are so closely entwined. And I'm going to pass over to you because nothing I say will explain what you're going to say in the way you do. So I will share your slides. When you tell me you're ready, I'll spotlight you on the screen, and don't forget to unmute when you get started.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks. I've unmuted, so hope that's okay. Thanks ever so much. But I'd like just to respond to say, since starting to work with you and colleagues, it's just been such a great experience. You know, it's a big learning journey. You think about things that you didn't think about before, and it's lovely to just be part of a session like this and change your mind. It's really important to be able to change your mind, I think. Okay, let's look at these slides so that we have a bit of order to what we're going to see. So we've got a few slides here on, how do I get rid of this? Yeah, celebrating our identity as researchers. Now, identity is a funny old concept. And there's a nice set of theories called linked into one big thing, which is called positioning theory. And it's really interesting. It's how other people position us and how we position ourselves. And go to the next slide, please, Claire. Thank you. Okay, how can I get rid of this box? Right, celebrating our identity as researchers. Now, there is a difference between being called a practitioner and being a practitioner researchers. So go into the slide, please. Next. Right, it's commonly assumed, now I'm not saying I agree with this, but it's assumed that practitioners do their work well and systematically. They are professionals. If you talk with them, they'll tend to describe what they're doing. They may also describe how they're doing it. So if you go to get your car fixed, for example, you could talk with the mechanic and they can tell you what they're doing and they can tell you how they're doing it. It's very interesting. Next one. Practitioner researchers also do their work well and systematically. They're also professionals, but if you talk with them, they'll tend both to describe and explain what they're doing. That is, they'll say what they're doing and how they're doing it. And they'll also say why they're doing it like this. And there's a big difference between those. You know, they may also explain how and why they need to evaluate their practices and possibly change what they're doing in light of their evaluation. That's really important. Those three words, it's to describe something. I could tell you what I've done. Explain why I've done it that way. And give you reasons and purposes as part of that explanation. I can tell you why I've done something. It's really so important to get that difference, you know, to describe something, say what you're doing it, how you're doing it, and then to be able to explain. If you do a course of study for a higher degree, that's what the examiner will look for. They look for, do you just describe what you're doing? I did this, I did that, I did the next thing. Or do you explain why you're doing something and what you want to achieve? That's so good, because in this program, one of the key things that I find so much to be celebrated is that participants don't need prompting around that. They do it. They cover those three fields: what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it like this. Why can be a very annoying word. For example, I've been doodling while we've been talking. If you see this, we'll all be familiar with children and students irritating people, saying, why? And a tendency is sometimes to say, go away. But we don't. And in this book, which is called The Reflective Practitioner, it's a brilliant book by Donald Schoen. And he uses a lovely metaphor right through the book. He talks about the hard, high ground of academia. And he also talks about the swampy lowlands of real life practices. So here we go. There's the hard, high ground of academia up there. And here's the swampy lowland of everyday practices. And what Schoen tells us is that the people who live up there, or who are positioned up there, are seen as somehow better than the people who live down here. And one of the things that makes them so-called better is the form of knowledge that they work with. The form of knowledge up here is traditionalist, scholarly, academic types of knowledge. People down here produce everyday, functional, practical knowledge. Now, the irony shown is that very often the knowledge that's created up on the high ground is not much use in everyday life, yet is valued as good quality knowledge. While the knowledge that's produced down here in the practical swampy lowlands is not given much credibility in academic practices, but it's the most functional, common sense, useful kind of knowledge around that will get us through the day. This will get you a doctorate, this will get you the bread and butter. In recent times, there's been a shift where it's kind of leveled out here, so that a lot of practical knowledge gets talked about up here in academia. But by and large, there is still this prejudice that people up there somehow qualify as more authentic knowers than the people down here. And that's what's so special, I think, about the work that we are doing in this program, because we're taking everyday situations and putting it forward as very worthwhile knowledge and producing those explanations that are needed, because the explanations constitute good quality theory. And that's another very important thing, that in higher education, theory is seen as their province, whereas in other sectors, the idea is, well, they can do the practice, we can do the theory. And that divide has been challenged systematically by yourselves as teachers, as practitioners, as powerful theorists. Because right through this program, my experience has been that people are not content. Just, I've seen a message come up to say, unmute myself, so I've done so. I hope you've heard what I'm saying. People are not content just to position themselves as, I'm just a practitioner, I'm just a housewife, I can do the practical stuff, I'll leave the theoretical stuff to the people up there. That's not no longer the case. And I think what we're doing here in producing our stories of good practice, good quality practice, has done a lot to break down those barriers. Claire, could we go on to the next slide, please?
We can. And Jean, I have something to ask you.
Yeah.
You have planned a discussion.
Take my phone down. That's his
planned
number. You need to go outside and have a look if he's there.
Somebody mute.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jean, we had planned a discussion activity now, and I'm a little bit concerned about time.
Okay.
I wonder if it would be possible to, when I share screen, to say what it would be nice to do in a pair after the session with one of our colleagues.
Great.
And then I'll move on to the next slide.
All right.
Jean, what I was thinking was that the questions that you suggested that we asked in this session would be fantastic questions to take away to a colleague after today's session. And I wondered if you wanted to say anything more about how you would hope that by asking each other what we do and why we're doing it, this helps us to, I'll pass back to you now.
That would be great, because often in professional education programs, people stop at the level of what are you doing? And you read the books, and again, you're at that level of what am I doing? A lot of teacher professional education stops there at what am I doing? But when it comes to how are you doing it and why are you doing it like this, that's when it gets a bit fragile. But if we would practice doing this, saying what we're doing, and also saying why we're doing it and how we're going to evaluate it, that would be great. Are we going on to the next slide now, Claire?
Yes,
tell me what timings to go to.
Absolutely, yes.
Points to be confident about in creating our identities, celebrating our identities as researchers. We've got to be confident about the fact that so-called practitioners do an excellent job on the job, and they can say what they're doing. You read that in all the reports. They can say what they're doing. And practitioner researchers, which is what all of us are, do an excellent job too. They can say what they're doing, and they can also say why they're doing it, how they make judgments about the quality of their work, how they might improve it in light of their own and other people's feedback. So there's that willingness to learn more and to share more and to explain more about what we're doing. Next point. And in this way, practice can be seen as an ongoing process of improving practices through self and others' evaluation. Next slide, please, Claire. Are there any questions about that so far, please? We're okay. So let's just, Claire, how much time have I got to talk? I can stop now.
No, about 2 minutes, Jean, if that's okay.
10 minutes still.
No, 2 minutes, if that's
sorry.
Sorry.
In, again, higher education, we've got this awful word, impact. Researchers are supposed to show their impact. Now, to me, impact is something like that. Whereas if you go with the ideas of people like Edward Said, you're talking there about influence. How do you influence people to change their thinking, to change their minds, to explore their thinking and decide for themselves what would be the best way to act? Because that's where we go back to the moral element. When we take action, this is something that the books don't emphasize, including mine, and I'm doing a lot of rewriting. When we talk about influencing something, we tend not to think in terms of how is that going to look 7 generations on. That's something that the Native Americans talk about all the time. 7 generations on. If I do this today, what's going to happen 7 generations on? And I think that's where, again, people in this group show such a moral commitment, such an awareness of responsibility to them, to other people, and their responsibilities as researchers. They're really important to demonstrate and be aware of that responsibility. So the last bullet point, if we're still there, is that practice can be seen as an ongoing process of improving practices through self and others' evaluation. We need to avoid this idea of certainty, which is in the traditional research archive, which says, if I do this, that will happen. That's leading us to think in terms of certainty. We need to be comfortable with uncertainty and say, I wonder what might happen. And that, again, is what I get from working with colleagues here. It's constantly asking, what might happen if I do this? Let's give it a try, and let's get the feedback from people. Now, is it possible? Yeah, we're back on that last slide. So just to say it again, in this way, practice can be seen as an ongoing process of improving practices through self and others' evaluation. That's what we do. Thank you very much for the privilege of being with you.
Thank you, Jean. We really appreciate that, and lots of people following what you're saying in chat and just helping people to pull out those key points. It's an opportunity for us on this programme to continuously learn from one another and to continuously learn and shift our thinking, as you started out by saying at the beginning, and that's what makes this such a privilege to be part of.